The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. Years ago, I taught junior high in a kind of relatively traditional school. I was teaching the Civil War. This was back in the days, when I was a teacher, I didn't even know what I was teaching. I'd read a few books the night before and go in there and teach it. I mean, that was basically the level of where I was at. And, after going into some of the details, what was going on in that war, for whatever reason, I decided to ask the students, if you lived in the South at that time, so, this is where they had slavery, or at least many of the areas in the South had slavery. I asked the students, about 12 students in the classroom, would you have fought on the side of the South, or would you have left your home? Like, what would you have done? I asked that question to the students. I would never ask that question now because it's basically like a setup. Like, are any students going to raise their hand and be like, yeah, I'd fight on the side of the South? Like, that's crazy because you're basically saying you'd fight on the side of slavery. Like, you want to keep slavery. You want to maintain slavery. So I was just assuming, obviously, no hands would come up. But one hand went up. It was so bizarre. I just remember my face, I'm thinking about it, at least in my mind, what my face looked like was like kind of shock. So I'm staring at this child with his hand up. The rest of the students turn around because they probably see something on my face. So we're all just staring at this kid. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what are we going to do? There's an actual racist in the classroom. Like, not just like, oh, I have a little bit of bias or prejudice. This is a straight up hardcore racist that we have in our class. So I'm starting to trip like, well, what are we going to do? I mean, we're going to get rid of this kid? Like, this is the thoughts that are going through my head. So whatever happened, I just looked and I thought to myself, I mean, the question that's on, I think, a lot of children and the students' minds, and maybe yours, definitely mine, why? Why would you fight for the South? Why would you, like, what? So I, as calmly as I could, I just looked at this child. His name was Christian. And I said, wait, Christian, why? Now his response, it shook me. So he looked me dead in the eyes. And I mean, he was close to tears. It was crazy. And he said, I couldn't, or I wouldn't leave my family. So just get this right now. This is a teenager. He's looking back at this time period. We had covered enough to know that, like, this is not just, the kind of cartoon version of slavery. Like, we had dug into it enough to see how sickening this was. I mean, like, just graphically bad and just a horrific institution. But he would defend it because he couldn't leave his family behind. So obviously he's not saying, oh, I think slavery is great and it's because of his family. Now, things started to click. I knew that Christian came from a very big family. I actually recently spoke to him to kind of get a better sense of what was going on. And it ended up being that he had 7 siblings, and all of them at the time he was basically taken care of as a seventh or 8th grader at the time. So we were in Orange County, California. He's surrounded by affluence, but this boy, he wasn't living affluence. He was not living well at all. And he was taking care of his family at the time, who, it seems, were heavily into drugs. So in his mind, it was family first. I need to take care of them. I can't just leave my whole family behind. And, it was in that moment that it was one of those moments in life where I realized that life history is a lot more complex than I might have thought at that time, to put it lightly. Now, fast forward to today. Life isn't always so complex. Sometimes it can be real simple. So something like George Floyd and what happened to that man. Now, I'm coming into this thing late. Relatively late, I think 2-3 weeks since what has occurred. But I've got to say, that's simple. You look at that video, you know something's really, really, really wrong. I'm not going to go back into what occurred with all that. I think you guys have probably had enough of it out there. And it's just, for me, sick to my stomach. There was that rapper Killer Mike. I don't know if you know him, but he put it as, I am mad as hell, as he said it. And in that moment, when I saw that video, I was in tears. And whatever your emotional response was, it's pretty simple and clear cut that you don't put a knee on somebody's neck for that long and then they're out and you still have your knee. There's something simplistically wrong, right? And I've talked to so many different people across the board, from police, from black people, white people, yellow, Indian, name it, female, male. Every single person looks at that and says, whoa, something is wrong here. That's simplistic. But when we step back from that simplicity and ask, does everyone really know this is wrong? Does everyone know that this video represents something much, much worse that we still have in our society? It's not just about George Floyd, obviously. So all of a sudden that complexity comes back. So I would say that some people out there think of the George Floyd and maybe some similar cases as just a result of a few bad apples. Maybe in some inner cities and in some of those racist neighborhoods in the South. But that's just not true. So I'll give you an example. A few years back, I was having a drink with one of my closest friends, Javon. And we're sitting there talking, and this was with some other case about police brutality was going on. And he shared this story with me. So he tells me, so Jesse, I don't think I ever told you, but a few years back, so before that, he was sitting on the curb in front of his mom's house, right? And incidentally, Javon's a big black dude, maybe 6'2", super dark skinned, but he's just sitting there in the front yard. Normal guy. I shouldn't say normal guy. He's one of the sweetest guys. It's one of my sweetest friends. He's just always trying to help people out, always trying to do what's right, not wrapped up in any trouble, just a good guy. And so he's sitting there with another one of my buddies named Chet, who I grew up with in elementary school, another big black dude. And all of a sudden, 2 police officers walk up to him. And they're like, "What's up, guys?" Or something like that. And they look back and they're like, what's up? And next thing you know, they have guns drawn on them. Imagine having a gun drawn on you by a police officer. And I was just actually talking with them over the weekend. And interestingly, Chet was telling me they actually had their hands in their pockets. So in his mind, he was completely tripping out because he's thinking, what do I do? And now with everything that's gone on in the world, one of the questions is, if he would have maybe pulled his hand out of his pocket, not deliberately to do anything, he could have been shot and killed right in front of my buddy's mom's house. It's insane. So Javon told me later that after the whole ordeal, which included them being handcuffed, again, right out front of his mom's house. And then, people are driving by watching this and seeing my buddy Duke or Javon in handcuffs, and Chet as well. So anyways, I learned afterwards that, so it seems that some black man had committed a crime, something, I don't know all the exact details, in the neighborhood, and these 2 police officers had jumped the gun. Literally in this case, jumped the gun. They had seen 2 black guys sitting on a curb and just decided to say, well, maybe it's them. They got black skin. And you pull a gun on them. I don't know about you, but I haven't experienced that. And this was in Irvine, California, one of the most affluent areas in our country. So this isn't just a problem of the South. This isn't just the problem of, some inner city living or something like that. It's a bigger problem. Now, anecdotes are not answers. So I think we need data too. We need experts of all races to do kind of the hard work of knowing where the worst offenders are and then really sweeping them out. But again, that's hard work. That's not simple. And I think, moving to something else, because it's hard, I think there are a lot of us that would like to make this simple, easy to deal with. We'll go on the other end now, or the seeming other end, and we can solve all this by lighting a building on fire. Burn the system down. That's where the solution is. Or maybe something equally simplistic. Let's just get rid of cops altogether. Defund police. Now, I have to imagine, as most people I've talked to, normal people think that's crazy. Like to just get rid of the police, right? That just doesn't make sense. Now, I know even within the people that might say defund the police, which seems super simplistic, just get rid of them. But there are people that are, actually looking for sober change of police in this nation, and I'm one of them because we got great things with them. And then there's some things that might need to change. Like maybe thoughtfully presenting ideas around maybe money shouldn't be spent on a war on drugs, or maybe police shouldn't have a special immunity, or maybe they shouldn't be put in the awful position of having to deal with mental health issues that are really outside of their field. Or maybe even police, think about this. They shouldn't be spending so much of their time giving out tickets. Incidentally, does anyone think good police officers like doing that? That's one of the issues as I see it. We're interacting with police only in negative situations. Like, I want to go have a barbecue with some police officers. Why don't you throw something like that in our communities? Like, build a sense of community. So there's a lot to be done. But today, it seems like people want to get simplistic. Like, is defund police the best way to go about that? Like, hashtag defund police. And then, of course, this seeming simplicity, it just begs for simplicity on the, quote, other side. So, instead of an empathetic and maybe a fact-based discussion around changing police for the better, how are we going to do it? Instead, it's all shut down on the other end with, tear gas and law and order. So which of these two sides do I choose? What should I choose? Should I choose hashtag defund police or hashtag law and order? Like, for me, the simplistic days of this, this kind of movement or that movement of Democrat versus Republican, even white versus black, or us versus them. Like, I just don't deal with it. I stay away. But I think generally, and this is, I think, a human thing, and I'm not denying it even for myself at times, it's so easy to pick a side or a tribe. And then once you've got your group, or once you've got, this is the way I see things, then it's very hard to get out of that. It can make it hard to actually see the world with fresh, clear eyes. So I'll give you an example of this. And this is outside of, political affairs and race and police. It's actually in my own field, education. So working with children. Just this past weekend, my wife and I were walking, into Target in the parking lot, and I hear, "Get in the car now." Now I look over, and it's a mother yelling at her son, must have been like maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I'm just like, all right, we're walking on. And my wife looks at me and she says, that child's foot was actually stuck in the seatbelt and he was just trying to get into his seat. But the mom didn't see that. Like, she saw a defiant child. So sometimes when we've got in our minds, child's going to be defiant, we're not looking anymore, right? We've made a judgment beforehand and it affects how we actually see the world. So there's this Montessori veteran educator that kind of summarizes this really nicely. She said, quote, "Many people, when they're observing young children, react from what they feel about what they see rather than what they see." End of quote. And I'd up it and say many people, when they're observing, period, react from what they feel about what they see rather than what they see. And I think that's because it's hard not to. Like, we have so much baggage we're carrying around with us, so much bias, especially if you don't do a lot of introspection. It's hard to even know you have it. And I'm not just talking about race, I'm talking about all sorts of things. But do you know who often doesn't have the baggage, the bias? They're really, really young. So, kind of hopping back to our current affairs and the issues we're facing today, I just want to give a quote of Frederick Douglass's that he talks about the lack of racism in little kids. Quote, "Aside from the curious contrast to himself, The white child feels nothing on the first sight of a colored man. Curiosity is the only feeling. End of quote. So that's from his article called The Color Line. But I mean, I got to say, as much as I love children, as much as I think children have so much to teach us, they don't have all the answers, of course. So how do we as adults regain, kind of at least their clear and curious eyes and act a bit better as a result? I'll give you kind of an example of how I tried to do this myself. Last month, I was, cruising around Facebook, saw a post from a friend. It's this video, and it's of a black man jogging around and eventually fighting with a white guy with a shotgun, and the white guy shoots this black man with a shotgun, right? And this is the video. It seems horrific. I read my friend's post, and he basically says, call this number and demand that this white man, and I think it was his father, be arrested. So they hadn't been arrested. I think it was like a month or 2 months, and this had happened, and they hadn't been arrested yet. So, I care deeply about the friend who posted this. He doesn't post, kind of stuff like this all the time, so I took it pretty seriously. But just because he's my friend, just because he's, he can think of it like he's part of my tribe, I didn't just go, whoa, he must know what he's talking about, and I'm just going to do what he says. I said, this looks really bad. Let me go dive into it and see if I can learn a little bit more independently. So I did my research. It was hard to get all the facts. I mean, many of you might relate to this. It's like you go to one news outlet and they're telling you one thing. Go to a different news outlet, it's the complete opposite thing. It's not easy to get facts these days. I don't really care about anybody's opinion anymore because I just want to see what the facts are. And let me make an opinion of my own for once, So anyways, I went there, tried my best to understand the situation. It looked outrageous. Like it seemed like there was a self-defense or something like that. But meanwhile, these are the guys like chase the guy down with the truck. So how do you call that self-defense? Whatever the case, I saw it was enough that these guys need to be in jail at the least, to be arrested. I'm not saying they did everything horrible. I don't have all the facts, but I know enough through my research that they should really have been arrested. So I went back to that post that my friend had put up on Facebook, saw the number, called. And it's basically what it was. You would call in and it would put you to maybe the sheriff's desk or something like that. And you would say, hey, what's going on with this case? Do you think these guys should be arrested? You talk to somebody. What was amazing was that whoever had put all this together in defense of justice and for Ahmaud Arbery, they literally made it so that if the phone line was busy, then it would go to some other place. Who knows, maybe the local newspaper or something, and it would ring there so that you can raise this issue. So it was just such a creative way of trying to get justice for this man and maybe some greater justice for this type of brutality going on in this area and maybe around the country, right? But particularly for Arbery in this case, just to begin with. And I just found it amazing. Now, let me just say, by the way, I'm not patting myself on the back for this. After about 10 minutes, it just ringing to different places and I couldn't even get through. And I think it's probably because so many people were calling because of this simple setup that they did, which was just brilliant. But I'm raising this because I knew in making this call that I was somewhat taking a risk. What if there's some huge backstory that I'm not seeing, right? I don't know all the facts. I mean, listen, we should be able to say it's possible. At least back then, this was before they actually, arrested them. And incidentally, this whole thing was so brilliant because literally 1 or 2 days later, those guys were arrested. And they hadn't been arrested for a month or two, before that. So this is such a great example of somebody saying, I'm going to make change. I know exactly what I want. I want these men arrested. Here's how I'm going to do it. It was just, this is how justice is done in my view, or at least leading up to justice. But anyways, I was a little bit concerned that maybe I would be, contributing to putting 2 guys in jail that maybe aren't that bad. But I thought about it and I weighed the differences and I said, that's a risk I'm willing to take. And I think even if I was in that situation, I'd be willing to take the risk for myself. Because who would want these guys running around if they actually were the kind of people that they look like on film, which it surely seems like it is the case. But anyhow, here is the point, just that these are things that we can do and try to be as objective as possible without bringing our own bias in. In this case, that I wanted to support my friend. I wanted to support what looked bad, but I had to do my research first, And on the broader note, injustices, we can affect change. We can do something. Frederick Douglass, again, I'll keep coming back to this guy. In My Bondage and My Freedom, he said, what man can make, man can unmake. And I mean, I think that was true in Douglass's time with slavery for sure. And it's still true today with the failures in our own current justice system that are relics of that time. Now, I should note probably, I quote Douglass so much because, in my humble opinion, he understood the human soul like almost no other person I've ever read or met in my whole life, right? In exposing depravity in society of his time. And as many of you know, he painted a graphically depraved but true picture of the time. Like what he did that I think is unique among people that write about injustice is he always contrasted it with the light, with the beautiful, with like what's good in life. So, kind of with that in mind, I want to share something that's both, kind of dark in my memory, but also like super uplifting. And I experienced this about a year ago, and this goes back again. I'm going to hop back into children because I think it just gives us a lot of insight into us as human beings and adults. But anyways, my wife and I were out at one of these, Benihanas, like Asian style, like they cook the food in front of you on a grill. Sometimes there's sushi there too, but it's really the grill cooking, and they play games with the food. They toss it up in your mouth, that type of thing. If you haven't been there, this might sound really weird, but it's a lot of fun. But anyways, I'm out there with my wife. Now, since it's a big grill, you don't just sit alone. Like I can't just go out with my wife and we're just at our table, just the two of us, which I think is kind of cool too, because now you're part of this community, of the random people you might get sat with. So anyways, we get sat with a family. So it's seemingly a husband with his wife and two children. So we're there, we're sitting down, think, oh, this would be cool. We'll have some chat. I tried to chat it up, wasn't happening. At least definitely not with the husband. He happened to have earphones on, interestingly, and just started looking at his phone the whole time while the mom is kind of taking care of the two kids and they're having fun with the chef and so forth, right? And he's just out of it. So one of the boys, this boy I'd say he's probably about 5 or 6 years old. He starts playing a little bit with his food, right? And I mean, the whole concept here is kind of like even the chef is playing with food, right? But the dad, this is the first time I saw the dad interact with the child at all. He just goes, bam, smacks him on the head, like a good smack. This is not like just a love tap. This was a bam smack on the head. And I'm sitting there like, this is, I mean, I don't see this normally. I moved to Wichita, Kansas, in Southern California, Orange County. Interestingly, either people are doing this at home and hiding it, but they're not as often doing this out in public, at least not in the affluent areas. Because this is, this would be looked down upon, right? But whatever the case, he did that. Now, my wife and we're in education. We work with, parents, teachers. She works with 3 to 6 year olds now. I used to work with children every day. We're very sensitive to this kind of thing. So I just got to tell you, like emotionally, it was tough for me. The child started crying. You could tell that the mom kind of felt a little bit of shame. It was an uncomfortable situation. Now, I'm telling you this because just think about that moment. Think about that child having that feeling of his dad literally hitting him on the head. Now, some of you out there, you might think that's not that big of a deal. Like personally, I do. And I think if you go back to your own childhood, I think you'll think of it as a big deal too, if we can get in those children's shoes. But anyways, that's kind of the dark or the low point of this. But what happened next, like, it was just so cool to me. So, the chef, the guy who's playing around with food, a few minutes later, it's that time when they start, at least this guy, he would flip a shrimp and he'd flip it into your mouth. So you'd literally have to catch the shrimp on there. So it's just such a playful, benevolent feeling. So he's doing that and he gets the child back to like not crying. He's flipping the shrimp and the child's trying to catch it, right? And it was just this moment of like, yes, like let's bring something positive here, right? But that's not even what sticks with me about this story. What sticks with me about it is what he did next. So he goes around the whole table doing this. Well, what's going to happen when you go around to, bitter dad here who's got his headphones on, not paying any attention to the chef, not talking to anybody at the table, smack this child on the head? What happens then with this shrimp? And this is what was so cool. the chef, he tapped that, like, I don't know what you call it, a spatula, whatever he's flipping it with. He tapped it so he got his attention. And he's got this shrimp. Now remember, the chef saw all of this. Like, I don't think the chef had a very high opinion of this dad. But he's like, I'm going to uplift the situation. And he flips this shrimp and the dad's trying to catch it. And, all of a sudden you saw this hint of a smile on the dad. So that chef, he's much like Frederick Douglass in this case, where he wants to uplift human beings. He wants to uplift the human soul, right? So there was something so profound. And there's a quote by Confucius that I really like. And no, it's not just because this guy's Asian and then Confucius is Asian. I just really like Confucius, okay? But it's, quote, "A gentleman helps others to realize what is good in them. He does not help others to realize what is reprehensible about them. A petty man is just the opposite." End of quote. So I don't know if you're out there, the guy flipping it, but thank you, because, you kind of changed things around for me, and I'm already a very positive, benevolent guy. So thank you. So kind of, wrapping up here, I know I've covered a lot, went back and forth between seemingly completely different topics, but I think they're connected. And, I got to tell you, I just got to tell you straight up, it's been a drain on me to try to think about what to say today, or even to talk about this topic of racism, police brutality, what's going on in our country, looting, rioting, killings. Like, where do you go? What do I jump into? I mean, I've been doing this podcast for over 2 years now, and nearly 50 episodes, and this was by far the hardest one to put out. I mean, I must have talked to 20 different people today from all walks of life, not today, but over the last few weeks. And it was a lot, like trying to just figure out, like, what do I think about all of this? What do other people think about this? And just come into my own take, Now, I think a lot of it's such a complex situation we have right now in America. Some things are simple. Some things are clear cut, needs to change now. But how do we go about it? It's complex. But there's another part of it that I think is different, and it's bad in another way. And I'd say that sometimes we are not being real enough with each other. And unfortunately, it leads to feeling the need to hold back, or that you're not going to do enough. You're not going to say enough. You're not going to say the right thing. I'll give you an example. Like, I have a good friend who, I posted a personal post about George Floyd. It was a picture of his mom and him as a child in her arms. And I just said something like, it destroyed me emotionally, which it did. So he had called a couple days later, or I think he texted me actually, and he said, I feel, similar to you about George Floyd, but why didn't you also talk about, the tragic killing of David Dorn? Now, I'm not going to get into David Dorn here, but I think it's worth looking him up, because it's just another thing that's just very difficult with everything that's going on. But look him up. But the point is, he was telling me, yeah, you did this right, but why didn't you do this? Or it might be the woman who told me that, a former colleague of mine, and I put up a quote of Anne Frank, and it was about Anne Frank was basically telling us, or telling herself in her diary, don't jump to judge others first, do some internal work before, and I had added, before you lash out on enemies on Twitter or something like that. So kind of let's look within before we go and look outside for blame, right? And she wrote me and said, I know you're trying to be, a nice guy or something, which, I'm not trying to be a nice guy. I just really love Anne Frank. But regardless, she said, but I think your post was disrespectful to the Black community, or something along those lines. I mean, ironically enough, I thought I was going to get the wrath of Trump supporters for it, because I had mentioned, about, railing on your enemies on Twitter. So I didn't do enough there. I didn't do what's right there in my post. Or say it's one of my friends with black skin who says I'm not sufficiently harsh enough on the police. Or, it's another of my friends with black skin who says I'm not sufficiently harsh enough on the Black Lives Matter movement, because he doesn't like them. And no, I want to know, these are my friends I'm talking about. So I know I'm not going to get it right with everyone else out there in the world. So it was tough for me to just say, you got to be comfortable with that, Jesse, and just put out what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and get it out there. So there's no way we're going to cut through some of the complexity of what we're facing without rattling one another in some way. I mean, just think, Christian back in that Civil War class, like he rattled me. And even though, when he said that, I got to tell you just straight up, I was still disgusted in the moment because I don't care about your family. Like as much as I love everyone in my family, I'm going to tell you straight up, if they chose to defend slavery, I'm done. I mean, that love, it doesn't go away, but I'm done. I'm getting the hell out of that house and I'm gone. I will not support slavery. But Christian, he was raised in a certain way. He was putting family first. So I'm not saying that's good, but at least I learned something. I realized that my lens of viewing history was way too simplistic. I mean, I think one of our biggest challenges today is not being phony with one another, but just saying it straight. What we feel and think at times. I mean, not being, yelling it in somebody's face and being rude about it, but just getting the true feelings and thoughts out. So maybe you say something wrong. I mean, maybe I say something wrong. Okay, I grow. Well, maybe you grow. But with this approach of like open dialogue, open conversation, get it out, I'm certain we'll all grow. And if you don't want to take my word for it, here's Malcolm X on the point. Quote, "The only way the problem can be solved. First, the white man and the black man have to be able to sit down at the same table. The white man has to feel free to speak his mind without hurting the feelings of that Negro. And the so-called Negro has to feel free to speak his mind without hurting the feelings of the white man. Then they can bring the issues that are under the rug out on top of the table and take an intelligent approach to get the problem solved." End of quote. Now, personally, I think, he saw the world too much in black and white, like literally. And that's why I'm a Douglass man myself, as he did not. He saw it as, I think, justice versus injustice ultimately. So I would only change Malcolm X's point to say that all men must be at the table and their voices respected while there. And when I say men, this includes man and woman, black or white, or brown or yellow, or wearing the blue, all of it. And, given my field and my focus, that table, it also includes children. So that's really all I have for you out there today. Thank you for taking the time to listen in. If you gained even the slightest of value, I'm happy. So here's to all of our future, and we'll talk soon. Adios.